Starting record. Uh-oh. Hold on. It said couldn't do it. Oh, well, it looks like it's doing it. Okay. Do you see where it says recording? Okay,
Yes.
super. All right. All right, let's do this again. Good morning, and I hope that you are all well. We are in week 2. Let me get my calendar out. We're in week 2. I pray that you had a blessed weekend and celebrated Dr. King's birthday on Monday. And we find ourselves in week 2. Week 2 for my students that are here and those who are watching online, we are going to jump into chapter 2 of Susan White's book. And her book, you want to make sure that you get Susan White and also Costin's book if you don't have that already. But today we're focusing on chapter 2 in Susan White's book on the components of Christian worship, the components of Christian worship. We're going to focus also on instruments today. We're going to focus on instruments. And so your discussion forum focuses on instruments. I want you to read pages 47 to 49, just those 2 pages in Susan White's book. And for your discussion post, some of you students have already done it. Your discussion post is what role do instruments play in enhancing worship experiences today? What types of instruments have you observed that may be used in a worship experience? What biblical evidence can you provide that also speaks to instruments being used in worship in the Bible? So you can use examples from scripture to answer that last question in your discussion forum. Also, don't forget in your discussion forum as you post, engage your classmates. Unfortunately, like on an online course, we don't see each other face to face all the time. And so that gives us a way to interact with each other, and you'll get that credit as well. Week 1, I'm just kind of doubling back. Thank you for doing that introduction forum. Those grades have gone in to let everybody know that you are active in the course. Had everybody except one student. So we're trying to make sure that that student is with us and everything as well. All right, everyone. Just a heads up looking towards next week. This class is just going to move by so fast. I'm trying to get as much in. Next week, we're going to be in chapter 3 of Susan White's book, where we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper. I won't get into too much of that, but I want you to read up on pages 88 to 92 for next week. We'll talk about what the Eucharist is and Lord's Supper for next week, okay? All right, as I'm setting up our lesson for today, what did I want to tell you? Good morning, everyone. As we're setting the lesson up for today, I wanted to remind you, check out your email. I think I emailed it or put it in the announcements on February the 9th. We have an opportunity, and it is totally volunteer. You do not have to go. And I know some of us are spread around Georgia, but the DeKalb History Center has a session on Black church music, and I'm going to go. I think our dean, Dr. Ako, is going to go. If you're interested, you're more than welcome to join us. Of course, transportation would be on you and the ticket would be on you. And I think there is a lunch that is included. And if you're interested, just drop me an email and just let me know. And if not, remember, y'all, there's no penalty. There's no problem with not attending. I thought it was so cool that something like that was happening during our our semester. So I wanted to share that with you all. All right, let me pull up my lesson here. All right, let's see. Can somebody let me know? Good morning, everybody. Can somebody let me know when you see instrumental music in worship on the screen? Uh-oh.
Yes.
You can. Okay. And guess what? It's gone for me.
Yeah, it went away.
It went away. Okay. What about now?
Yes.
All right. All right. All right, everybody, we are going to chat about instrumental music. Last week, somebody told me last week we started talking about the foundations and what worship is. So before we get into the instrumental piece, y'all see me adjusting my heater here. What did we say worship is from last week? Do you remember some of those things?
I think it was community.
Community, very good.
Participation and
Good.
see what else.
Good. So with the community or communion, we can do it individually or we can do it with a group of people.
Right.
Yeah, sharing fellowship.
Very good. There has to be sharing of something. It could be sharing of a testimony, sharing of a song, sharing the preach word. Good. Very good. All right, very right. That sounds good. Y'all remember from last week some of those foundational uh, uh, elements of what is worship. Let's get into one of the key things. If we have a worship experience, and we're going to be sharing today as we're reading, one of the key things in a worship experience is music. From Old to New Testament, and I'm just going to go ahead, you can go ahead and get your Bibles too, because we're going to take a look at some examples. One of the key things that we find in either individual worship or collective worship is the institution of instruments, music, hymns, singing, instrumental music played behind a prayer. And so we're going to get into all of that today. All right. So if you can, go ahead and get your books out, go ahead and get your Bible out, because we are going to get some examples here. All right. So the Old Testament, if you go to the Old Testament, worship is all around. And remember, if you were with me for the Old Testament course, who is the group of people that we follow in the Old Testament? Somebody mute your microphone. Somebody mute your microphone. There you go. Thank you. In the Old Testament, who's the group of people that we're following? All right, I heard it. Sorry. Did I hear the Israelites?
Yes.
There you go. So we're following the Israelites. So we're following Jewish tradition. And so there is large evidence of instruments being used. Of course, some of the instruments in 2023 we don't use as much, but there are instruments that we still use that they have used as well. For example, everybody, you can go to actually, let me see if I can pull this up on the screen. I want everybody, I'm going to pull the Bible up on the screen. We're going to go to Numbers chapter 10. Numbers chapter 10. Okay, I'm going to pull it up. Let's see if we can see it together. And if somebody gets there before I do, we don't have to read the whole thing, but we are identifying instruments. Let me see if I can pull it up on the screen. Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay. Numbers chapter 10, if anybody is there, good morning to my students that just joined. If anybody's already there, I want you to identify, this is Old Testament, but identify some instruments that you see.
Silver trumpet.
All right, in verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, make two. Now, isn't this awesome? He didn't say go buy two trumpets. Isn't that awesome? The Lord said to Moses, make two trumpets of hammered silver. That's awesome. So they didn't have a music store. So, so we see trumpets are used. See if I see another one. I think, okay, I think our main instrument here is trumpets. I want you to, let's read that real quick. I'm gonna go to verse 3. When both are sounded, the whole community is to assemble before you at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So the tent of meeting was kind of like their place of worship. They didn't necessarily call it like a church like we would. If only one is sounded, the leaders, the heads of the clans of Israel, are to assemble before you. When a trumpet blast is sounded, the tribes camping on the east are set out. So this was also a signal. Look at verse 7. To gather the assembly, blow the trumpets, but not with the signal for setting out. And so there were instruments used here to gather them. This was a signal that we're going to come together to come to the tent of meeting. And the tent of meeting was a place where they gathered to meet the Lord. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go back to our lesson. Pull this back up. All right, so we went to Numbers chapter 10. Also, as we talk about trumpets, trumpets were used in a lot of Jewish festivals. So that was one of the main instruments that you would hear played. Flutes were also used in temple worship. Okay, somebody go to 1 Chronicles 24, 6 through 7. I'm gonna pull it up on the screen so we can read together. And for my students who are watching the video, I want you to go to 1 Chronicles chapter 24. This is in the Old Testament. Chapter 24, verses 6 and 7. Verses 6 and 7. I'm gonna pull it up here. When somebody gets there, let me know. 1 Chronicles, I'll leave it on the screen. 24. Chapter 24, verses 6 and 7. Okay, are you there?
Yes. Shemaiah, son of Nathaniel, a Levite, acted as secretary and wrote down the names and assignments in the presence of the king, the officials. Zadok, the priest, Amalek, son of Abiathar, and the family leaders of the priests, the descendants of Eleazar and Ithamar, took turns casting lots. Is that 24:6?
You know, yeah, I gotta
Professor
messed
Barry,
up.
I believe that
Yes,
should be 25.
Chapter 25.
25. I
25,
made a typo in there. Miss Gloria, I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Let me go to 25. I got a typo. Let me see here. 25, verse 25, 6 and 7. Let me see. Okay. Yes. I apologize, Miss Gloria. I had the wrong. I got a typo there.
Just wanted me to stumble off all those words, that's all.
You started reading, I said, wait a minute, something ain't right here.
I was reading, I was saying, this doesn't seem like,
Miss Berry, it's not your typo, it's in the book like that.
It is in the book like that. So she got it. So Susan got a typo wrong. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, scholars. Okay. Well, look, we got some more education there from chapter 24. So let's go down to chapter 25. Thank you, students. I said, wait, something didn't sound right. If we go to stay in First Chronicles, just skip over one chapter to chapter 25. Yeah, that was a typo. And it says all these men were under the supervision of their father for the what? Music of the temple of the Lord. Now, here are some examples. Do you see some of these? What type of music were they in charge of? Cymbals, lyres, or some people say lyres, and harps for the ministry at the house of God.
mhm.
I'm gonna keep going. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the supervision of the king. Verse 7, along with their relatives, all of them, trained and skilled in music for the Lord. I had a typo here. They numbered 288. Okay, so I'm gonna pause right here. They numbered 288. So I just want you to see that. I'm gonna change that in the PowerPoint. I want you to see that here we have another example of instruments. Cymbals are used, lyres are used, harps are used. Beautiful, beautiful instruments. They have such a beautiful sound. But there's something else I want you to see as we see in Old Testament worship. Okay. Let's talk about this real quick. As we see worship unfolding and organizing in the Old Testament, was it just thrown together?
No.
No. And we get evidence of that from verses 6 and 7, that these individuals, Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman, were under the supervision of the king, and that they, look at verse 7. What about these musicians?
They were accomplished musicians, trained, I guess I have accomplished, I have an NLT, but
Okay.
trained.
They were skilled. So maybe they had some type of school, or they had a place where they would go, where they would practice, because they saw their act or their responsibility of worship as something serious, something we need to practice, because the instruments directly affected their worship. Okay. And worship was that outward, what we want to say, action that was done in relation to the human, to God. Okay. So there was speculation. So now remember, y'all, we're not necessarily talking about Christians at this particular point, because we're still following the Israelites. We're still following Jewish tradition. And it was speculation that worship in the synagogues or in the temples didn't use instruments. But we do see that there were instruments used at some point. There were some instruments used, maybe not to the point where we see them today, but there were some instruments used, definitely. It is thought that early Christians later on in the New Testament didn't use many instruments, but we do find that worship, it was found in the book of Revelation, that did include instruments in their worship. Okay, let's keep going. Now we're going to open up our microphones. Let me hit stop. We're going to open up our microphones and do a little sharing today. And I think when I click on things, I make them go away. All right, I want you to see the picture on the right. And even this picture is very dated as we see ourselves in 2023. But, you know, some of our churches have all kind of stuff going on. Worship has changed over the years, and instrumental music began to appear more so in Christian worship around the mid-2nd century. As we see music start to change, a lot of problems started to arise in Christian churches, and pagan and Christian music were increasingly confused with one another. So in some Christian churches, and we're going to open this up and discuss some of the music, some of the instruments were confused with you know, the world or the devil or something like that. And then people in certain denominations were ostracizing certain types of instruments. And we're going to talk more about that later. Some early church leaders disagreed, and they even discouraged music in the church, but it did return back to the church in the 7th century. So you see around the mid-2nd century, they're really starting to, and remember 2nd century, this is, after the death and resurrection of Christ. And then up until we have that problem with, I don't know if I want music, it might be worldly, it is worldly, it's not worldly, and then you see it go away, but you do see music come back. Now let's pause for a minute. I want to hear from you. Where I pause up here when I say things begin to change, and we're going to listen to this pipe organ. I want you to think about the times or your history. How have you seen music change? Let me come back to you. How have you seen music change or instruments change in your local church, or maybe one you have visited? And I'm just curious, did anybody grow up where maybe your church did not use many instruments, or did you see a influx of certain instruments start to come in over time? Mr. Bentley, I saw you open your microphone.
Yes, it did.
Go ahead.
I grew up in the 50s. The church I attended, it was Baptist. The only thing allowed at that time was the piano. And I'm not a member there anymore, but I've watched that church, even though it's a small town church, it has grown, and it has instruments like saxophones, guitars, drums, and all. And it's a big change. And the church I currently attend, it has a small band. This is not the one that provides the music for the hymns and all, but actually it has a band that plays. Why I'm so attentive to that, I do play an instrument. I do play trumpet, and
you play
so I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen a lot of changes in music.
But trumpets in there too. All right, so I'll be putting some of the examples I heard. I heard saxophones, drums, guitars. Oh, I put drums again. Pianos, organs.
And
Now we see full bands are playing.
Keyboards with full bands playing now.
The keyboard. Many of us, I don't want to say all of us, and then our folks who are watching may you have visited, or maybe you attended church that has a band. We have 2 guitarists, we have the drummer, the organist, and I don't know, I guess that's a keyboard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, keep going, class. How have you seen it change? How have you seen music change in the church during your lifetime?
I think it's changed tremendously. Our church, we did in Chicago, because there's a lot of gospel there.
Yeah.
We had organ, piano, and drums. And that was pretty much it. And I think that's pretty much it still today. But the type of songs that they sing, when I grew up, they sang hymns and spirituals. And now, I don't know what the name is for it, but it's different. It's not gospel, I would say, but it's Christian music. I would classify it as that. And some churches, two churches I attended, they had a full orchestra.
Wow. I'm going to see if I can pull up Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. They have a full orchestra. It's just awesome. Thank you, Miss Gloria. Anybody else wanted to open your microphone? Let us know how it has changed. Music has changed, how you have observed how it's changed. Now, the church I grew up in, Baltimore, we had, let's see, which for me would be 70s, 80s, we had a piano, we had a pianist on one side and the organist. That was it. And they just, let's see, I don't know when they got a drummer. I think maybe they got a drummer maybe in the 90s or 2000s maybe. Okay. All right. And so I'm gonna go back and share our lesson. You have seen instruments evolve, instruments change. Let me see if I can get my music in here. Uh-oh. All right, so we're going to listen to the pipe organ in just a second, but we're going to talk about certain types of instruments. So the pipe organ became very, very popular in churches, but more so in Europe around the 700s. Now, I want you to take a look, before we listen to it, I want you to take a look at the pipe organ. It has a wide range. I think it's about 5 octaves, a lot of different tones and timbres that the pipe organ will, oh my goodness, if you've ever heard it, it fills up the room. Let me see, is it Morehouse? I believe Morehouse College has one. And it is just to hear that sound it'll just really just blow you away. But you'll see the picture right here, and you see all of those pipes. Now, let me just pause. Probably many of us growing up did not see this type of organ in our churches, because it's very elaborate, isn't it? Imagine how long it took to make that. Imagine how expensive it is to make that. And so we didn't see that much here in the United States, but it was very, very popular in churches, especially Catholic churches in Europe. I'm gonna transition to this real quick, and we're gonna listen to the pipe organ. I'm not sure if you all were able to, on Christmas, is it Christmas Eve or Christmas night, they usually show it, is
Bellman.
no, it is the Catholic, I think it's the Catholic Mass. And if you get a chance to watch that, it comes on Christmas Eve. Well, it would be Christmas night. And the Pope, does the Christmas Mass, and behind him, you'll see that huge pipe organ. Let me see if I can. All right, everybody, I'm going to come to you, and we're going to listen. Oh, 1 second. All right, and we are going to listen. Let me make sure I share my sound. Let me know when you see the piano. Excuse me, it is not a piano. You've probably heard that. And you hear how boisterous, how loud it is. Very detailed. Let me find another one in a cathedral. We'll get a couple of different sounds here. Let's see. Okay, can you hear that pipe organ?
Yes.
Anybody play the organ? Nobody, okay. Okay, so I wanted you to hear that, just a very, let me see if I can, that pipe organ from the Christmas,
It has a very robust sound.
It is just huge, isn't it? Let me see. No, I wanted you all to see the Christmas mass. Um, I'll have to find it later, but there was a Christmas mass just this past holiday, and the Pope was there, and it was just so elaborate. But right behind him, I'm going to find that video, was the pipe organ, and it was just so beautiful. Okay, so let's get back to our lesson, how we're doing here with time. The pipe organ is huge. You saw how big it was. So, as you see, most churches, the ones that we may have attended, can't afford a big pipe organ. So let's look at organs again. Here's an example on the left-hand side of a more modern organ, much smaller. I just love to see people play the organ. It is, I mean, they use their whole body. They use their hands. They use both hands, their feet, their face, everything. It's just so beautiful to see. But this is an example of a more modern one. I'm going to show you an example in just a second of Mennonite church music. So the Mennonites sing a cappella, and they believe in no instruments. But when you hear their voices, it's almost like, why would you even need one? Oh my goodness, their harmony is so beautiful. All right. And so I say, here we go again. Here's another fight. Church people, we always fighting, right? And so they were still fighting in history. In the 16th century, the Puritans of the English church, so this is in England, they disagreed with organs in the church. And do you know that they signed a petition to get rid of the organs? Okay, so they're like, nope, we don't want them, get rid of them. But then in 1644, I want you to keep up with these dates. In 1644, legislation was passed to do what? Look at them. They're going to destroy all the organs. And I'd be mad if I was an organ maker, right? But then in 1660, remember this is in England, we're not necessarily talking about United States at this time. In 1660, the ban was lifted, and guess what? The organ comes back into the building, comes back into the church. So in church history, you always have, as we do today, one group says this and one group says that. One group interprets scripture this way and the other group interprets scripture another way. Or perhaps maybe the organist was playing too loud. Maybe it was just all about them and their prelude. You never know what was going on to make them say, we're going to sign a petition to get rid of it. However, most of it was the music seemed worldly to them. The music from an organ is very loud. It takes over the building. And perhaps these Puritans at the particular time were saying, maybe this is not what we should be doing. Maybe this is not of God. Maybe the organist was taken away from the worship experience. But then we see in 1660 and until today, the organ is back in the building. However, we're going to go to the Mennonites now. The Mennonites continued their ban on instruments. So the Mennonites said, we're going to stick with it. Okay. So let me go to this video. And all right, everybody, I'm going to come right back to you. We are going to listen to the Mennonite church. Now, remember, the Mennonite Christians from all the way back. So remember back then in 1640s, they said, nope, we're not going to let the organ back. We're going to sing a cappella. And I want you to listen. It's about, we'll listen in about a minute or so.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed?
All right, so I wanted you to see, to hear Mennonite singing. If you take some time to go on YouTube and look up some other examples of Mennonite churches. They are Christian, but they do not use instruments. And let's just pause. Any reflections on the Mennonite singers here at this church?
Professor, this is Marshall. I enjoy that singing without the music. My neighbor, the church next to me here, they do the same thing.
Are
And
they
so
Mennonite?
sometimes on the fifth Sundays when I'm not in church, I go over and visit them, and they're surprised that I can sing with them because I know the hymns they're singing. Just we sing with music, but I can sing right along with them, and it's very interesting. The men lead the songs. The ladies can sing along, but all of the men lead the songs. And so I sit with the men and I sing with them, and they just enjoy that I can come in and fellowship with them. It's really nice.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, Reverend Marshall, it is a Mennonite church?
No, it's not. It's
Oh,
a
gotcha.
white church. It's a
No worries.
Church of Christ.
Wonderful.
Church of Christ.
So that's another example, as Reverend Marshall shares, this, okay, not just the Mennonites, but there are other other denominations, Christian denominations that do not use instruments in their worship. But I wanted you to hear that, just such beautiful. Y'all, I think my heater just cut off. Hold on. All right. At the end of the 18th century, we see town bands become really popular. So music is starting to get popular. People are playing different instruments outside of the church. And now you see those town bands start to come into the church. And they started to be played, but guess what? The bands were played in the rear of the church, in the rear of the church. Nowadays, you see, where are our musicians? Where do they play?
Up front,
Up front, okay?
I think the choir loft used to be up in the balconies, and a lot of times.
Right in the balcony, and that could have been behind. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, so town bands, and so remember this, around the 18th century, they became popular, but they were not in the front of the church. They were played in the rear. They were played in the back. However, over time, it started to be a problem. And you know, somebody always got to play loud and, and do something wrong. And here we go again. More of the instruments were barred from the church. I want you to look on the screen. We have a couple of examples. Around 1903, we had drums, some electric instruments, but especially drums and even pianos were barred from the church. Anybody was in a church or you were raised in a church where drums were considered like a no-no? Okay. Church leaders also, during history, church leaders thought that the musicians would become too self-indulged, too concerned about themselves, maybe that they would get too loud or too big with their gift. And so that was another reason why certain churches would discourage the instruments. Certain church leaders thought that some instruments were more worldly than others. For example, like you can find a piano in, everybody's going to use a piano in blues, in gospel, in classical. Piano's going to be everywhere, right? But drums were one of those instruments that was considered worldly. What are some others? Guitars. Um, Especially electric guitars, the sound or would just be very loud, but there's a way to play it, you know. Any other instruments that might be considered like you've heard church leaders in history consider, ooh, that instrument, can't play that in here. Okay. Now remember, on the last part of here, if you look on the lower right, the gifts of the musician can greatly impact and enhance the spirituality of the congregation. Let me say that again, because we're going to talk about that. The gifts of the musician, or I should say musicians, because we have more than one musician in our churches, can greatly impact worship and enhance the spirituality of the congregation. All right, let's talk about that. Now I'm going to ask you this question. How, H-O-W, how can a musician or musicians, through their gift of playing the drums or playing the organ, playing the piano, the trumpet, how could it enhance a worship experience? Have you seen that? And while you go ahead, I hear a few people. Was that Mr. Lee? Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, Professor, that it can have a tremendous effect on the worship experience. I worked in radio back in the late 70s, and I was playing secular music. But today, listening to a lot of the gospel radio stations, it's difficult to tell whether they're secular or gospel.
Yeah. This just me. I just had to listen to my own music. Cause I don't, yeah. It's, and that's another part. That's another part that we're going to share. Mr. Lee, it has changed, hasn't it?
Tremendously. And you have to be careful, because sometimes to I guess impress people or to grow your ministry, you have people that are the church trying to sound like the world, to bring the world in, when it should be the opposite. And I don't know, but music, I think, is very important. You just have to monitor to make sure that that the message in the music, so to speak, does not cross the line.
Okay. So the message in the music. So also I want you to, I'm going to show you this video in just a second. I want you to think back. Anytime, you could think of a musicians, that as they played whatever instrument it was, a piano, an organ, the drums, their guitar, and because that person was anointed and in their place at that particular time, it did something to you, or it did something to the worship experience. I see some head shaking. Yeah, we've experienced that before. And of course, we've also experienced maybe somebody was trying to do a little too much, but we've experienced, because this person is so anointed and they're so gifted, and when they play this instrument, it is just breathtaking. Okay, if you want to share, go right ahead. I'm going to share this example of that last quote. Okay, let me know if you can see this video. It should say at the top, "The blood will never lose its power."
Yes.
All right. Now, remember in that last quote that I had from you, that I had for you on the PowerPoint, we said that a musician's expertise or their talent can greatly impact the worship and also impact the spirituality of it. I believe this is all instrumental. We're not going to listen to all of it. But this is a old video, and this is Richard Smallwood. I think he's playing the piano. I just want you to pay attention to how his gift, and also I believe there's a gentleman that plays the saxophone, changes the worship experience. Here we go.
Events are back,
Oh,
you guys.
Lord, it's
Events
always a
are back. They're
commercial.
booking speakers
Sorry, y'all.
like you. They're paying them $5,000, $10,000.
That's YouTube. Okay, I'm going to fast forward to the saxophonist that comes in. So far, do you see what we're saying where an individual talent can, he has just, this is Richard Smallwood, how he has just moved this worship experience. Let me see. Okay. That is a classic example of, I'm about to go all the way in, y'all. I know I'm at work, but ooh, my Lord. Richard Smallwood. Oh, Reverend Marshall, that was at an AME church. I'm gonna find out what church it was at. I'm gonna post this video. It was at an AME church, I want to say in DC. No, I apologize. I'm sorry. It says Metropolitan Baptist Church. But I'm thinking there was another video he did at a AME church in DC. He just blew the roof off of it. All right. This is a classic example of that last passage we talked about, that a musicians can greatly impact the worship, can greatly lift the spirituality of the people. Did you notice? Now, we were just observers. We were not there physically. This is a recording, right? Did you notice? Somebody tell me, observe the people in the beginning, the congregation in the beginning. Let me see if I can.
They were very subdued, you know, they were just sitting quietly.
Yeah.
And as they played, the temperature, I guess you would say, began to rise. They became more engaged.
They sure did.
They knew the song and at the end began to sing.
They sure did, because at first it was more instrumental. And it was a familiar hymn. I believe it was Communion Sunday. We're preparing.
Yes.
But the talent of the musicians, because it wasn't just Richard Smallwood, but although he was leading, right, because he was, more vocal, but the talent, the anointing of all the musicians coming together, that saxophonist at the end, and I know we didn't have all of it, but now the people you saw them start to stand up, you saw them clapping, shouting, things of that sort. So that's where I wanted to go with this, is that music is important. The musicians are important. And when they bring their gift the right way, of course, when they bring their gifts the right way, it just, it just really brings the worship experience to another place. So we're thankful that as we pause right here, we're thankful that Old and New Testament, but Old Testament shows us even in the Psalms, worship, lifting your voices, even with your mouth, but praising with timbrels, praising with dance, the flutes, the harps, the lyre. We heard about trumpets. And so we saw that Old Testament, remember this is Jewish culture, that they didn't hold back on instruments in worship. And remember, they didn't have a what do we call it? A instrument shop to go to. They didn't have Amazon to order from and it'd be there for Sunday service. They were making their flutes, right? They were making their harps. They knew how to make stuff. So it's just, oh my goodness, just overjoyed when we see the musician and we see the role of music and instruments and how it enhances. And even we talked about the church, the Mennonite church, that didn't use the instrument. But I have to say this, they do use an instrument. The instrument is their voice. So they use, if you listen to the men and the ladies, how they harmonize, if you listen to some of these a cappella groups, some of them are Christian, some of them, just regular a cappella groups, they can just make their voices sound they can sound like a drum, or somebody else sounds like you ever hear those groups and they can kind of keep beat and it's like, wait a minute, it sounds like a drum was in there. No, that was somebody, making that beat sound with their mouth. So anyway, I say all that to say that even if the church opted not to have a drum or some type of instrument and they're using their mouth, that is a type of instrument as well. So let me stop. We have about 11:57. Any questions, comments we want to raise here?
Professor, do you think that the music or songs cross the denominational lines? I mean, like I was saying, that I went over to the Church of Christ and I could worship just as much as they worship and sing with them and enjoy it. Although we have our differences, but the music bring us right there to the same level.
Correct. It does. So you will see, just like in that example of the Mennonite, um, the Mennonite church. I had heard that song, but like you said, we sang it with an instrument. So I had heard that song before. So remember, it's not so much denomination, because denomination just simply says, well, we like to do it like this over here, and this group might do it like that over there, but still serving the same God. And that's always helpful to say, well, okay, well, this group may use this type of instrument, or this group may not, but serving same God.
Professor Berry,
Yes.
since the pandemic, attendance it's down at most churches. And one of them is, a lot of them don't have the big full choirs that they used to.
Yeah.
And what I see happening, the pastors, they're younger, they don't know what to do because they don't know about congregational singing. You always didn't have the choir show up for afternoon service, but that you were able to sing a hymn or something at church was, and service would go on. So that's what I see happening now. A lot of a lot of members haven't come back, but they don't have full choirs anymore.
No, we don't either. I don't know what happened to the choir. And I put there in the chat. So now we have this could go to another discussion, the choir versus a group, or maybe like a praise team. Mm-hmm. So that's been a change that we've seen and not just with the pandemic, we've seen that. Oh, I want to say maybe over the last, 15 years or so, maybe 10, 15 years, where we've moved into a praise team, and some groups, some churches may have a praise team and a full choir if they had enough people.
Yeah.
Mhm. Very good. All right, anybody else before we leave out today? All right. Well, thank you, students. This was good. I want you to observe. Take some time. I'm going to post that video of the Mennonite churches posted in week 2. I'll post the video of Richard Smallwood. It's a long video, but if you desire, you can watch it. And it just really shows that musicians are important, and they can go a place really where other people can't go, even though the preacher will preach and, other people will do things on the service. The preacher will go one way, but the musicians can, you know, totally do another thing as well. And we all work together.
I've heard that the musicians or whatever set the atmosphere.
They do. They do. You see that very historically in when you read Psalms. It talked about the musicians would go out ahead and that they would sing as they were going up the mountains, and they would prepare. They would prepare the worship, prepare for worship for the Israelites. So you're right. They really do. They're very important.
Miss Berry, also I'd like to add that when King Saul was when he needed to be refreshed, when that evil spirit came upon him, David would play the harp, and that evil spirit would depart from him. In the Old Testament, in the book of Samuel, it talks about how the heart caused that evil spirit to
That's
depart
correct.
from Saul. Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Therapeutic.
Therapeutic. He needed it. All right. Thank you for that example. All right, everybody. I won't hold you. I pray that you have a great day. I will see you what's next Wednesday? Gonna be the 25th. We're almost out of January. 25th, I will see you then. For my people who are watching the video, make sure that you watch and do your discussion posts. All right. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye,
See you later.
Professor.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
You too.